Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Courageous Leadership, How to Build Backbone, Boost Performance, and Get Results, hosted by HRDQ-U and presented by Bill Treasurer. My name is Sarah, and I will moderate today's webinar. The webinar will last about an hour, and if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them into the chat area on your GoToWebinar control panel. And then we'll either answer them as they come in at the end of the session with Bill as we have time, or after the session by email if we're out of time. So our presenter today is Bill Treasurer. Bill is the founder of Giant Leap Consulting, a courage-building company, and the author of the international bestseller, Courage Goes to Work. He is also the author of the Courageous Leadership Training Guide, the world's only off-the-shelf facilitator training program, and his courage-building workshops have been taught to thousands of executives in 11 countries on 5 continents. Bill's newest book is The Leadership Killer, Reclaiming Humility in an Age of Arrogance, which he wrote with Captain John Havlick, retired Navy SEAL. Bill's most important roles are that of husband to his wife Shannon and father to their 3 beautiful children, Alex, Bina, and Ian. Welcome, Bill, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be back. I'm really looking forward to the time that we're going to be spending together, and I'm really grateful for all of the folks who showed up today to this webinar. We have over 800 plus. Around 850 folks have registered from all around the globe, believe it or not, showing me that you're interested in leadership, one, so it shows me a lot about you, and you're also interested in this topic of courage. Sarah and I were putting it together today, and we've probably done webinars together for about a decade, at least 10 years, and I'm always gratified to be able to work with HRDQ, and now with HRDQ-U, the university arm of HRDQ. So we're going to be talking today about a training program called Courageous Leadership. It's a training program to build workplace courage. I'm really lucky. I'm the CEO of a company called Giant Leap Consulting. And when I say CEO, I mean Chief Encouragement Officer. I'm lucky in that I get to go around the world. And in any culture that I work in, there is a word that means courage. You can't find me a culture where there's not a word that means courage. And that's partly because courage is part of the human condition. It's an essential element of the human condition. With every group that I get to work with, including this group today, you all attending this webinar, I learn from groups like you, and then I take what I learn and then I go and I bring them to other groups. So today we're going to learn from each other around this idea of courage and courage building. And I also want to let you know that much of the material today is going to be extracted from the Courageous Leadership Training Guide. It is an off-the-shelf, comprehensive, do-it-yourself leadership courage program so that you can infuse courage into your own workplace. And it is represented by HRDQ. So it is, they are one of the exclusive providers of this material. Just to explain it, there is a trainer's guide that has scripts and agendas for a full day and a half day courage building workshop so you can put courage into your culture as a cultural value system. And then there is a participant workbook for all of the people who go through your courage building programs if you care to facilitate it as a trainer. And then finally, there's a courageous leadership profile that has 30 questions that you can use right in a training session, and people can identify how much courage they have in 3 different areas that I'm going to introduce you to later. It's a signature program, as I said, offered by HRDQ. So this material has been road tested at a bunch of clients. These are clients that I have worked with in the past or currently. Many times they are doing it as part of a cultural transformation effort where courage has bubbled to the surface as a new value that they need to instill in the company. And then they'll go find this material. Sometimes they'll do it themselves by getting a do-it-yourself program, the one that I just talked about. Sometimes they'll bring us in, my company, to introduce people to this material. And then oftentimes I'll work with a smaller subset from the company to do a train the trainer program. All of these are available through HRDQ. So here's the first thing I want you to know. I'm going to share with you 6 lessons about courage, as well as 3 tips towards the end. And I've got plenty of questions and ways of interacting with you. We only have an hour, so I'm going to introduce you to as much of this material as I can in an hour and try to make it engaging so that you get to really feel energetic about what we're doing in terms of courageous leadership. Here's the first lesson of the 6 that I want to share with you. You already know a lot about courage. You're a courageous person. Each person that is going through life has courage inside of them. You can't go through the human experience without activating your courage. Having said that, all of us have denied our courage at some point too. That moment when we bit our tongue when we should have been speaking up, or doing something that was hard and scary, but we walked away from it. We've denied our courage as human beings, and we've embraced our courage as human beings. So today, I told you that we're going to be learning from each other. I want to start off by learning from you. And here's my question to you. If you were coaching a valued friend who needed more work courage, what advice would you offer? So if you would just chat your answers, we'll get to view some of these and we'll learn from each other. So if you were going to be giving a valued friend or colleague some tips on how to be more courageous at work, what tips would you offer? Let's see what you got. Feel free to go ahead and chat in your answers. The point of the question is the recognition that you already are courageous. You have plenty of ways of activating your courage. So I'm seeing some answers coming in right now. Great. These are great answers. So here we go. I'm going to share a couple of with you that I see. Let's see. Say yes more often. Terrific. Stand up for the right thing. Right. If you can anchor it to a set of principles, a set of core values, then you know what you're doing the right thing. It's easier to do that tough action. Follow your gut. You've got inner wisdom. You've got inner counsel. And sometimes it makes sense to follow that. Let's see. You gain a lot more courage by doing bold things. Don't let yourself be walked over. Have a clear vision of what you're trying to do. Don't be afraid to speak up. Mentioned to that one. Let's see. Do what feels right and be confident in your skills. Great. Gain skills so that you have confidence in them. Coming through. Don't you let yourself be walked all over. It's okay to say no. That's right. It is. And sometimes courage is in the yes and embracing the yes. Sometimes courage is a disciplined no and having a boundary to put in place. Great. Don't be afraid to go against what's quote unquote normal. Explain the detailed performance expectations. Good. Y'all, see? You're just proving my point. I told you were courageous. You all have terrific tips on how to be courageous more often. My encouragement to you is share those tips. Have those conversations with the people in your workforce. Start conversations. If you want to change a culture, a workplace, it starts in conversation. Even talking about courage starts to instill a value system. I'm going to go on to courage lesson number 2. Courage is a teachable virtue. Courage is a teachable virtue. Now, I'm not the first one to say that. In fact, Aristotle said that courage is a virtue. And he said it's the first virtue because it makes all the other virtues possible. C.S. Lewis, the great theologian who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, he said that courage is not just one of the virtues, it's all of the virtues taken to the testing point. Outside of work, courage has always been a premier, if not the premier, virtue. The rationale of my business is, why would it be any different at work? It's not any different at all. In fact, courage is the first virtue of leadership and business. If you think of important elements in business, for example, if you want people to be innovative, you know where innovation almost always starts out with? Blasphemy. The current technology, when you come up with a new disruptive, innovative technology, is going to become obsolete But the people who are loyal to that old technology are going to see you as a blasphemer when you come in with the new idea. So things like innovation. How about being a great salesperson or business developer? Means knocking on hundreds of doors in the face of rejection over and over again, and that takes courage. How about being a leader where you have to render bold decisions that some people are going to disagree with and give you flack? And you've got to be able to withstand the turbulence of that. That takes leadership. So innovation and sales and leadership and presentation skills and conflict and all the things that matter at work always come back in some form or fashion to courage. So courage is the first virtue of business and leadership. My company, Giant Leap Consulting, is trying to advance a new organizational development practice. We are a courage building company. You can find out about us at couragebuilding.com. There are three fundamental premises with the idea of courage building. I know you've heard of the term team building before. We think courage building is just as important in the workplace. The first premise is that courage is a skill. It's teachable. It's learnable. You've been learning how to be courageous since you were a little kid, maybe about 6 years old, and one of your parents took off your training wheels on your bicycle, and you took 4 wobbly pedals forward and fell down and scraped your knees, maybe cried a little bit, and then your parents made you get back up on that bicycle. Persisting through suffering is something we learn at a young age. But just because you learn courage at a young age doesn't mean you get a pass from having to learn it or activate it later in life. How about when you were 12 years old, maybe you had to confront the schoolyard bully? Are there schoolyard bullies that are still existing in the workplace later in life that you have to confront? Sure there are. So you've learned how to be courageous since you were a kid, and it doesn't stop then. People perform with higher morale and engagement for longer periods of time when they're operating out of confidence, courage, and conviction than when they're operating out of fear and anxiety. And yet, still many leaders, if not most, use fear and anxiety to provoke people to get things done and or to motivate them. We just know that there's a better way. And then finally, the entire organization can be transformed for the better when more people are showing up to work each day with just a little bit more courage. It can have a transformational impact on the workplace. Now, I'm an advocate of courage. I've been in my business. I've had now, this is the 18th year, I believe. I've been in organizational development for about 25 years, and I'm an advocate of courage. I've seen it transform lives. I've seen it transform businesses. So I try to teach it even to my own kids. I'll tell you a quick story. A couple of years ago around Halloween, I dared my kids. I've got twin 15-year-olds and a 12-year-old. They were a little younger a couple of years ago, and I dared them to sleep in the scary shed in the backyard. Now, my kids immediately said, "Dad, it's October. It's like 20 degrees outside. We're not going to sleep in the scary shed outside." I said, "No, wait a minute, kids. I'm going to dare you to do this. I want you to find your courage, and I will give you each $5. To which they said, "Dad, $5. Don't forget, Dad, we have animals that live near us here. We've got bears in Asheville. This is our driveway. Here is a bear about 15 feet away from me. Here is a bear by the scary shed playing Frisbee." So my kids were like, "Dad, we're not going to be going out to the scary shed and sleeping overnight. We have bears." Here's a picture of my kids sleeping in the scary shed. And it only cost me $150. They did it for $50 each when they wouldn't do it for $5 each. So sometimes it just takes a little incentive to confront your fear the first time. Later, it wouldn't be the same value to them. It diminishes over time. So I want to give you that idea that courage is important, that courage is teachable, and that people can learn to be courageous over time, even if you have to incent them. Here's the third lesson. Courage is found in discomfort, not comfort. When I talk about courage, I'm not talking about, walking on the moon or running up a hill with a machine gun in your hand and charging against the enemy, or running into a burning building. I'm talking about an everyday, more accessible experience of courage that's available to anyone. In our one-day workshop, we'll often ask people to give us examples of courage that they've seen at work or that they've been introduced to at work. Here's some things that we hear. How about taking on a new role that eclipses your current skills, putting yourself in over your head on purpose? That takes courage. How about giving a presentation to your boss's boss? Public speaking is petrifying for a lot of people, and it means having to experience and activate their courage just to be able to do it. How about giving tough feedback to a peer or a boss? I mean, we expect downward feedback, but how about giving it laterally or upward? That takes courage. How about soliciting honest feedback about your own leadership? Asking to go through a 360-degree feedback at work, for example. What about enforcing new performance standards on tenured employees who've been around for a while? How about having to lead people on your team that you are younger than and they have more experience than you in the workplace? That takes courage. So there are literally an endless list of examples of work situations that necessitate the need for courage. In any one of those situations, we tend to exist on a grand continuum that ranges from safety-seeking behavior on the one hand to opportunity-seeking behavior on the other hand. Now, most of us are willing to go out on that continuum to some degree, and then we get to a point at which we hesitate. We call that our comfort zone. By definition, if you're not in your comfort zone, where are you? That's right, you're in your discomfort zone. If you're not comfortable, you're uncomfortable. And here's the thing to recognize. If you are in a leadership position, you have two responsibilities. The first is to be occasionally up and off whatever high dive platform you're asking other people to leap off of. You have to be a role model of courage. Ask yourself, when's the last time you did something for the first time at work? If you're in a leadership position and you haven't gotten out into your discomfort zone in the last couple of years, maybe it's time to, because you have to be the role model, the standard bearer of the ethos of courage. The second responsibility that you have as a leader is to make people uncomfortable. Now, I don't mean that in a fear-stoking or fear-provoking way, because I got lots of research that will show you the diminishing returns of fear on impact and performance. But I do mean it in a way that nudges people out into their discomfort zone to help them grow, progress, and evolve, because that's where the learning happens. We would call that the courage zone. Not so far out into discomfort that they petrify or choke, but enough out into discomfort where they're growing and they're trying new things and elevating to higher standards. I love this quote by Ginny Rometty, who happens to be the CEO of IBM. She had a history of taking on jobs that eclipsed her skills, so that when IBM was looking at a CEO candidate inside and outside the company, they said, you know what? Ginny Rometty has done a lot of hard things here and figured out how to be successful. Here she is at the Fortune magazine Most Powerful Women's Summit. She's got a great quote. It's really worth writing down. She says this: comfort and growth don't coexist. Comfort and growth don't coexist. If you want to grow, progress, evolve, have a thriving career, you've got to be willing to go out on the skinny branches and do uncomfortable things. I'm going to tell you how this worked in my own life and how I became interested in the notion of courage. And in order to do that, we're going to take a walk down history lane and watch me over 40 years ago. Now, there I am in Larchmont, New York, where I grew up, doing a back dive when diving became my sport. I'm about 11 years old in those old images. I'm 45 now. And diving became my sport. I wasn't a great athlete, but when I found diving, I got pretty good. And I won the Westchester County Diving Championships 3 times. Colleges started to dangle scholarships in front of me. And they'd eventually all ask the same question. They'd say, Bill, you're a great low board diver. You're a great 1 meter specialist. We also have high board here at school. Tell us about your high board list of dives. And I didn't have a high board list of dives because I was and am petrified of heights. So now I had to confront the decision. What am I going to do? Am I going to, miss the opportunity to maybe get a scholarship to go to college because I'm afraid of heights? Fortunately, I had a coach who took me down to Iona College, where they had a diving board that was built in a hydraulic lift, like when you take your car to get an oil change. And he was able to take that diving board and move it up to 1.5 meters. Now, I was scared. My heart was racing. I was going over on my dives. I didn't want to go to practice. I was upset with him for asking me to do this. I was really uncomfortable. But after about 100 dives, my heart started to simmer down a little bit. After 200 dives, it became easier. After 300 dives, it got boring. Boredom is a great clue. If you've got people that are working for you that are starting to get bored and complacent, that means it's time to turn up the heat a little bit. What do you think that my coach did then? He moved that diving board to 2 meters. Now my heart was racing again. I was going over on my dives. I was upset with him, et cetera, et cetera. 200, 300, 400, it got normal again. He was using this process that we call modulation of comfort, modulating between comfort and discomfort, allowing me to move out into discomfort where it was awkward, where I was vulnerable, gave me time to acquire new skills. As I gained confidence, it became time to move me back out into discomfort. Through this process, the kid who started out with a profound fear of heights eventually did this for a living. So for 7 years, after getting a full scholarship to West Virginia University because of a coach who nudged me out into discomfort, I was a member of the U.S. high diving team, where I was diving from 100-foot platforms, traveling at speeds in excess of 50 miles an hour before hitting a small pool that was only 10 feet deep. This is how I activated my courage. The kid who started out with a profound fear of heights because of a coach who nudged him into discomfort in a thoughtful, lengthy way, and a way that took time and preparation, eventually, by nudging me out into discomfort, modulating between comfort and discomfort, I was able to acquire the high board list of dives and eventually traveled all around the world. I have experienced firsthand the redeeming value of confronting fear. I'm still a big fraidy cat in a lot of areas of my life. Believe me, you have more courage than me in many areas of life. But in this area of life, I was able to activate my courage and dominate my fears. I'm still afraid of heights, but I was able to subdue it long enough to do 1,500 high dives. That became the premise of my first book, which has a picture of me on fire on the cover of the book. That's me at Six Flags Over Georgia as Captain Inferno. And the cover of that book, my first book, was Right Risk, 10 Powerful Principles for Taking Giant Leaps with Your Life. I dedicated the book to that diving coach, Ford Winter. I named my company Giant Leap Consulting. I'm a chief encouragement officer, and now my business is helping you take whatever high dive you're taking. or facing, or your company is facing. The question becomes, what's your high dive? What is that platform of safety you might be standing on for a little bit too long and you know you need to get off of? I knew when I wrote that book I wasn't done because I was doing a lot of courage building workshops. So I decided to write a book called Courage Goes to Work. This book became an international bestseller, became the 6th best-selling management book in China in 2009, unexpectedly. And it goes into its 10th anniversary, and edition actually comes out in March with a new foreword that was written by John Ryan, the president and CEO for the Center for Creative Leadership. That material, that book, I blew it out into the training program that you can now take and do in your own workforce to build workplace courage. This off-the-shelf, comprehensive training program, Courageous Leadership, that HRDQ offers as one of its esteemed products, and I'm grateful for that. So all of that, I would have none of this if it weren't for a coach who believed in my potential before I believed in it, and who demanded that I encounter the courage that was inside of me all along in the first place. Now, one of the things that I want to share with you in tip number, lesson number 4, is there are at least 3 kinds of courage. I'm going to introduce you at a very high level to the 3 buckets of courage that we introduce in the one-day Courageous Leadership Training Program. There are 3 different ways of experiencing courage. Not all courage is the same. It's not always about heroics. It's about doing uncomfortable things, but in 3 different distinct ways. The first is what we call try courage, the courage of initiative. The second is trust courage, the courage of vulnerability. And tell courage is the courage of voice or assertiveness. I'll explain each one in a little bit more detail. Try courage is when you have to do something you've never done before. Something that you are attempting that other people may have done, but for you, you're experiencing your try courage. For example, I got a 15-year-old son at home who's getting his learner's permit. And he and I have to go to a number of parking lots, and I got to teach this kid how to drive, multiple thousands of pounds of steel that I've been doing like I could almost do it in my sleep, the way they have cars with such technology now. But for him, it's a petrifying experience, and I got to admit, I'm a little afraid when I go driving with him for his first time. So try courage is doing something for the first time that you experience. We call it the courage of first attempts. If at first you don't succeed, try again. It's when you have to do something that is out purposely in your discomfort zone. It could be learning a new skill at work, for example, or having to get used to a new technology system, for example. That's different. It's often attached to the courage of action, doing something, which is different than the second bucket of courage, which sometimes is the courage of inaction. It's the courage of vulnerability. Now, if I asked you if anybody has ever accused you of being, or if you got honest about it, that you would admit about yourself being a controlling person, what would you say? Do you find yourself to be controlling? Well, a lot of people find themselves to be controlling, and the more controlling you are, the more challenging it is to gain the experience of experiencing your trust courage. So trust courage is the courage of vulnerability. It's the courage of me releasing my need to control or my need to be right. It's hard to do. Most of us have been betrayed by the time we get to middle life. Maybe we've even betrayed others, and we get a little jaded about trusting. We sort of, put little walls around our heart, and it become, for some people, trusting others is very difficult to do. And yet, you can't build strong bonds of interpersonal relationship, which are so necessary between leaders and followers, without getting to the experience of vulnerability and exposure that relationships require, and that takes courage. So we spent a lot of time in the one-day courage building class on how to gain trust between people. Then the third bucket of courage is what we call tell courage. It's the courage of voice or assertiveness, the courage of the truth teller, the courage to not bite your tongue and go along and get along, but the courage to give people a dose of truth when it might be hard to do so. We expect people to be truth tellers to their direct reports, but even that is hard to do. But, how about giving lateral feedback or upward feedback? How about stopping the production line and raising your hand and saying, you know what, there's an unsafe practice that I see. I know I haven't been here as long as some other people, but let me raise my hand and voice that I'm uncomfortable. So tell courage is the courage of the truth teller. We say we want it. It's the number one thing we look for in a leader is honesty. And yet we also experience it as disrespect sometimes when somebody doses us with a dose of truth telling. I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to ask Sarah to do two things. We're going to show two polls. I had asked earlier, I mentioned this idea of doing uncomfortable things. So I want to get a gauge on how often you all do uncomfortable things. And then I want to get a gauge on which one of these buckets is most challenging to you. So we're going to do two quick poll questions, and I'm going to let Sarah take the reins for this.
Great. Okay, so our first poll question is coming up now. And if you want to talk through that, Bill, while people can click on those radio buttons and submit.
Great. Sure. So we're going to ask you a question here, and that is just to choose one. Which one best describes you right now? I'm planning on taking a bold move at work. So in other words, you're kind of contemplating it. That's A, choice A. Choice B is, you know what? I'm currently taking a bold move at work. I'm actually in the midst of doing that bold move at work. Then choose B. And if you're taking a break from bold moves at work right now, choose C. So we're collecting some responses. We're seeing the averages move back and forth here. So again, A is I'm planning on taking a bold move at work. B is I'm actually taking a bold move at work. And C is I'm taking a break from bold moves at work right now. And we'll see where we land as the responses come in. And you might remember I said you have two jobs as a leader, doing uncomfortable things and asking others to do uncomfortable things. So we're going to gauge on that first one. What uncomfortable things? How often are you doing it? Great.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Looks like we've got everybody's responses, and you can see those results.
Great. So 32% of you are in the planning stage. You know you got a big, bold move at work to be getting ready for, and you're contemplating it. You're actually planning for it. 47%, the highest percentage, are actually in the midst of taking a bold move at work. You're in this transition, whatever that thing is. Usually it's hard and it's uncomfortable. And then 21% of you are like, you know what, I need a little break from bold moves. I'm actually taking a break from bold moves right now. All of them are legitimate answers. The only thing I want to reinforce is that as a leader, you got to be occasionally doing some tough stuff yourself, because it signifies to the people around you that you're leading that you're out in your discomfort zone, and that is how you grow, progress, and evolve, and that sets an expectation that the people you're leading should do so too. So you're role modeling courage. Good for you. Let's go on to the second question. So I've just introduced try, trust, and tell, the three buckets of courage. And what I want to get a gauge on this time is which of those buckets is most difficult for you? Try, trust, or tell. So when you think about trying, is it all about initiative, doing hard things you've not done before? Trust is about vulnerability and exposure, and that's B. And then tell courage is about voice or assertiveness, being the truth teller. And we'll see where we land on these three. So A is try, B is trust, and C is tell. What's interesting is that sometimes this question has some level consciousness. I get different answers when I do it with upper level senior executives than when I do it with, say, folks that are out in the field in the job. So it'll be interesting to see where we land as training professionals. And we'll give it a minute here for the scores to solidify. Try, trust, or tell. It's one of the major concepts that we teach in the One-Day Courageous Leadership program.
Bill, did you see the comment that came in from Anne?
No, what was the comment?
She says, great trust courage, Bill, in letting Sarah take the reins on the polling, and great try courage, Sarah.
Good. Thank you for the reinforcement, Anne. Very perceptive, and you're learning the 3 buckets of courage very well. And it's it's one of we actually spent a good deal of time of that in the one-day class, how to differentiate and discern between which buckets, because there is some overlap. It's true. So right now, what we're looking at, and you're welcome to show the results there. We've got 16% of you find try courage to be most difficult. The vast majority of you, 49%, find trust courage to be the more challenging item. And then 35% of you find tell courage to be more difficult. And I mentioned that there is a level consciousness to this. When I work with upper levels, often I find that the trust courage bucket is the highest bucket. So it's often when I work with senior executive groups, senior project managers, vice presidents, executive vice presidents, and C-level executives, almost always the trust bucket is the hardest one. The lower you go into an organization, often
Bill, are you there? Can you hear me? Because it looks like we may have lost your audio. Okay, yep, thank you, everybody. I can see that everybody else is, okay, good. You can hear me, but you cannot hear Bill. Oh, technology. Isn't it fun when it works great? Let me reach out to Bill and see if we can grab him back. Thank you, Bruce. So I've messaged him, and we'll see if we can get his audio back.
Okay, can you hear me? Yep, I'm here. You got me?
I can hear you.
Good. I literally just asked the question if I was still connected, because I don't know if my web must be. I'm getting a note from this webinar platform that my connection needed to be reestablished, but it is, so that's good.
Yep, you're good. Okay.
Great. So fear-based leadership, discourages courage. Fear gets in the way of courage. I want you to think about a leader you least admire at work, somebody you've actually experienced. What are some things that those leaders that you least admire do that causes you to potentially lose courage? Like the question right there. Think about leaders that you least admire, that you've actually worked with, not people on the world stage. What do they do that causes you to either lose courage, or things they do you wish they wouldn't? So go ahead and chat in your responses. Put them in the. Go ahead and put your questions in, and we'll see where we land on this particular question. Let's see. I'm trying to scroll down. Great. Having no backbone and not standing up for you. Harshly judging others in the office. Right. These are good answers. Let's see. Coming down. He's insincere. Right. Insincerity gets in the way. Let's see. Scrolling down to some more. Great. So sometimes I'll hear people talk about micromanagement. When I got a boss that managed me, a boss that takes credit for the work that I do, somebody that's always negative, somebody who dismisses me. Sometimes we'll hear that from lower level employees or younger employees in the workforce, that their ideas don't seem to matter to their boss. So most of us by this stage in our career have worked with, a lousy leader. Here's an actual example. My boss gave the first Employee of the Month award to himself. Yes, that's kind of an arrogant, fear-based leader. Here's another one. This is a real life example. My boss, this actually is a very famous person, but I won't reveal the person's name. It's somebody who founded basically the bond trading industry. And this person said, my boss gave people communication demerits if people made eye contact with him, and the demerits were tracked and impacted bonuses just because they looked at this guy. That's fear-based leadership. I have a new book out right now. It's called The Leadership Killer: Reclaiming Humility in an Age of Arrogance, which I wrote with a Navy SEAL officer that's a buddy of mine from college. He's this big guy standing next to me and the little guy. I'm the dumpy guy in the maroon sweater. The guy in the middle is the president of West Virginia University, who's also been the president of Ohio State twice. He's been the president of Vanderbilt. He's been the president of Brown University, and he's been the president of Colorado. University of Colorado, and now West Virginia University 2 times as well, standing next to John Havlick, my co-author, Navy SEAL officer and captain. John and I we knew each other from 25 years ago when we were members at West Virginia University swim team, and then we had lost touch for 25 years. And when we reconnected about 5 years ago at an alumni event, we started sending stories and messages to each other about leaders and leadership. We're both very interested in the topic. And over time, we started noticing that the stories we were communicating with one another were about leadership fails, people doing things that were putting their whole reputations at stake. And really, all those leadership fail stories almost always come down to arrogance. It just seems like right now, there's a lot of arrogant leaders in the world. Here's just a couple of examples. Travis Kalanick is now the former CEO and founder of Uber. He really had a huge ego. He created a bro culture. Hey, bro, a bro culture at Uber. They had all sorts of sexual harassment lawsuits. He had a viral video of him chewing out an Uber driver who was simply asking for better treatment. And ultimately, his own board of directors of the company that he founded kicked him out of the company because of his own arrogance. Here's Elizabeth Holmes, the founder and CEO of Theranos. That was a Wall Street darling. Theranos became a unicorn, a $1 billion valuated company. Actually, over time, it got up to $9 billion in valuation. But it turned out that she was a great salesperson, but she was also engaged in massive fraud. Ultimately, the SEC banned her from any director role in a public company for life. She has been indicted by the FBI. In her deposition, she says, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, over 600 times. This is arrogance. And this kind of leadership does a lot of damage. Fear-based leadership drives out courage. When people are afraid of you, they're not going to do courageous things. They're going to shut down. And that's dangerous for innovation in the company and performance in a company. I had the good fortune a few years back of doing some work with the Pittsburgh Pirates. That big giant standing behind me is Clint Hurdle. And here's what he says in working with athletes about the damage that fear can do. Fear, whether it's of pain, whether it's of pain, failure, or rejection, is a toxic emotion that creates monsters in our mind that consume self-confidence and intimidates us from doing our best or sometimes from trying at all. In the one-day workshop, we spend a lot of time looking at the research on fear, how fear works, and providing strategies for managing and mitigating fear. But let me just sum it up like this. Your job as a leader is to do what Edwards Deming said, drive out fear. That means putting courage inside of people, not fear inside of them. Which brings us to the next lesson. Great leaders encourage courage. You got to be putting courage inside of people. A moment ago, I asked you to think of a leader that you least admired at work and their impact on you. Now I want you to think of a leader who made an impact on you. What did they do that actually encouraged your courage? I'd love to see you drop in some answers in the chat box so we can see the leaders that did leave you a positive impression on you, that made you better. Leaders who drew stuff out of you that you didn't even know was there? What are the things that those leaders do that caused you to have more courage? So I'm seeing here, have to scroll through. Let's see. Boy, I've got a lot of the other answers came through to the bad leaders. Now we're looking for the good ones. Let's see. They believe in you. Let's see. It's still coming in, getting some. Hey, Sarah, it's hard for me to read these. I'm wondering if you might read some out loud, if you wouldn't mind, as they come in. We'll just take a sample of like 5 of them.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have great participation today, so I'm sure your feed is filled. The first 2 answers came in back to back was they listened.
Yes. That's great, right? Because it's for one, it shows humility on their part, that they even listen to you, and it shows you that you're valued. Good. What's the second one?
Celebrated mistakes.
Right. They celebrate forward-falling mistakes, not habitual mistakes, but smart mistakes that come out with the wrong answer that anybody would have made. They don't chop your head off when you make a mistake. Good.
We have several who are saying along the lines of faith. They trusted in them.
Yeah, which is almost the opposite of micromanagement, right? They give you a task, they give you direction, they tell you that they're there to support you, and then they let you on your way and have faith that you will do the right thing. Good. These are good answers. Go ahead, one more.
And then the other theme that's coming out is the opportunities for trial and error, or pushing towards growth, or allowing for initiatives for their own ideas to be initiated.
These are great answers. So you've all worked with leaders who put courage inside of you. You know what it's like and the impact that it had on you. And sure, they're tough on you sometimes. They need to be. And we expect that comes along with leadership, but they believe in us, and they're tough on us because they care about us, not just to be bigger than us or something like that. Here's a leader that I've gotten to work with on a number of occasions, Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx. I actually worked with her 4 times, and she wrote the foreword to the book Courage Goes to Work, the book that became the 6th best-selling management book in China in 2009. Ultimately, the book that led to all of this stuff that we're talking about today. She wrote the foreword to that book. And Sarah says that when she was a little kid, her dad used to sit her and her brother down at the dinner table in Tampa, where she grew up before she ended up in Atlanta. And at the end of every week, he'd ask them the same question. He'd say, "All right, kids, what have you failed at this week? What have you failed at this week?" Not what did you do and you were successful at this week. He wanted to know, where did you try where things didn't work out? She learned at an early age that sometimes you got to be making some mistakes. You've got to try some things knowing that they're not going to work out. And doing that, you'll learn a lot about yourself and what you're able to achieve. Here's what she said at Fortune Magazine's Most Powerful Women Summit. And I love this quote. "When somebody makes a mistake at Spanx, especially when those mistakes key us in onto a new insight, I'm never disappointed. In fact, I go up to them and I give them a big high five. What do you think that does for their appetite to try new things and extend themselves?" Somebody said it even in the chat, right? That they don't take your head off when you make a mistake. I call the difference between these 2 leaders, the leader who puts fear inside of us, I call a spiller, because it spills out our courage. It discourages us. The courage goes away from us. A spiller leader versus a leader like Sarah that I call a filler, because instead of putting fear and anxiety in us, they put courage and confidence in us. They fill us with courage. And we spent a lot of time on the courage dispositions, those 2 leader dispositions, fillers and spillers, that we talk about in the One-Day Courageous Leadership Program. Now, I want to end with 3 tips, and then we'll open it up. Hopefully, we got a couple of minutes for questions, so I'm going to cook through these. So the first tip is you got to commit to courage. This is like the tip before the tip. You got to make sure the commitment. You got to be able to say, you know what, going forward, I'm going to be a leader or manager or just a person in the workforce that is committed to being and acting and behaving in a courageous way. So it starts with commitment. But here's tip number 1. You got to remember the first law of leadership. When you're in a leadership role, it's not about you. It's about the people that you're leading. Leadership's not about the leader. It's about the people being led. And when you direct your courage to outcomes that serve and benefit them, you're going to do a lot better. The second tip, deputize an ego checker. I already shared with you the damage that fear-based leadership can do and arrogance can do. So you need to have a check. You need to have somebody who can call you on your own BS, who can let you know when you've got spinach stuck in your teeth after lunch. The person who can be a truth teller to you, not to make you feel small, but to make you be better. Every leader needs to surround themselves with at least one person, hopefully more than that have permission and are in fact deputized to tell the truth to you. And then thirdly, if you want people to extend themselves, to try new things, to innovate, to speak up, to trust others, to try things, you've got to create psychological safety. You've got to make it safe for them to make sometimes mistakes, smart mistakes, not habitual mistakes, not dunderheaded mistakes. But even occasionally, if they do those things, how you react to the mistakes will say a lot about how much courage you're going to get out of them in the future. Do you turn it into a teachable moment, or do you use it as a way to hold it over their careers forever? The good news is that we actually have some time for questions. So I'm going to open it up right now. And Sarah, feel free to share with me a few questions that came from them. I can't wait to engage with the folks that are attending. This is where a lot of the learning comes in the Q&A part.
Absolutely. So we don't have questions that have come in yet, but we've got a really participating audience, so I'm sure they are thinking through those.
Yeah.
Here's the first one.
Okay.
So this is from Fred. Is it possible to have too much courage? And if so, what does that look like?
Oh, man, that's a great question, Fred. I appreciate it. And I don't want to give anybody the impression that I'm expecting people to be full courage all the time. In fact, I think it would be exhausting. It would probably be bad for your health. Courage is really powerful mojo, and I wouldn't expect anybody to have to tap into that mojo all the time. Is it possible to have too much? I think that it can be possible to have too much bravado. You can have the inappropriate display or use of courage. So, for example, Fred, a kid at 17 years old who steals a car to go for a joyride is being courageous inappropriately, stupidly courageous, right? So you can have the misapplication of courage, pointed in the wrong directions or for the wrong reasons. I've known plenty of people who had a lot of tail courage, who were very bold and would take pride in that. I'm just brutally honest. If you can't handle it, honesty and brutality, honesty as a form of violence, I don't go for that, right? So sometimes you can have the inappropriate use of display of courage. And yes, I think it's possible that some people use it inappropriately. That's probably more common than having too much courage. I actually find it the opposite most often, is that most people would say that there's some area of their life that they could use more courage in. But thank you for the thoughtful question. Good. What else we got?
He commented back and he said, well said.
Thanks, Fred.
So Rob here is asking on coaching upward. So do you have any advice on coaching upward to your boss on trust courage?
Good question. That's Rob. So it's a couple things come to mind. One is I know we get frustrated with our bosses, right? Like most all of us get a little frustrated about the change in behavior that we'd love our boss to make. And sometimes, and depending on who the boss is, it could be really frustrating. Sometimes you have to sort of suffer through a bad boss for a while. Having said that, I think that your probability of success in giving your boss feedback goes up a lot if you make it focused on your boss's goals that are important to them. So for example, I mean, just think of it, Rob. You wouldn't want somebody to point a finger in your face telling you that you need to change about something, right? Like if you're like me, you'd want to bite that finger. So that will not be successful. But if you can take the behavior change that you want that boss to make and connect it to the goals that they've said are important to them, so that when you give them feedback, it's around the speed at which you're able to get their goals, or the fullness at which you're able to get their goal, and how their own behavior is inhibiting the attainment of their goal, then your probability of success is going to go up a lot more. It helps to establish ground rules with your boss. So maybe at your next performance feedback, when your boss is giving you performance feedback, most bosses at the end will say, is there any feedback you've got for me? You might say, boss, do you need me to be a brown noser? Or a yes person. Now, almost every boss I know is going to say, no, I don't need that because it's dangerous for me. Then say, okay, I'll tell you what, will you give me some coaching? Can you give me some coaching on how to deliver a tough message to you when I need to? So get some coaching from your boss. And then at that moment in time where you need to give them upward feedback, just refer back to the new ground rule that you have set with the boss and say, hey, boss, remember 6 months ago we talked about you don't want me to be a yes person? I want to honor that commitment that we made to each other that day because I actually have to give you some feedback now. So set a ground rule that you have permission to be a truth teller to your boss. Good question, Rob.
Good. So we have this theme coming in, I can see here across multiple questions from people, and it's around the environment. So I'm just going to use one question here because I think it's worded sort of clearly. But how would you suggest showing courage in an environment when it is widely discouraged and sometimes even punished?
This is a tough question. It's a tough question because it comes down to a value fit. And if you are in a environment, it's one thing that if you're in an environment where it is clearly not a value and everybody knows it, nor is it a stated value. It's an entirely different situation if you can point to the core values of your company and there's a few of them that actually directly connect to courage, and now you're in an environment that lives outside of that value system. That's an entirely different situation. So if you are in an environment that is incongruent with the value that they have stated on the placard in the in the front foyer, then that's where a company where you have more latitude to call people on it, to call, to raise the standard and say, look, we say that this is what we're all about, but this is how we're acting. Then you have more latitude to do it because it's a stated value. But if it's not a stated value and you're in a system where you think needs more courage, but nobody seems to have it because everybody is walking around with fear, ultimately that has to become a choice. Do you think you can be successful in introducing this new value? Because that's a low probability. I mean, just think of it. Depending on how many people are in your workplace, if it's not a value, if everybody is walking around sort of with fear, courage is not something that has been deemed as important to the value system there and nobody does it, you will become the countercultural instantaneously. When you flag it and say, we need more courage around here, you might be seen as the outcast. So that's a much harder equation. If you're wanting to bring courage into a system, it's like I said very early on, the first way to do it, to help change a culture, is to start by little conversations, onesies and twosies, a conversation at lunch with your team in the lunchroom, where it's simple questions like, what's driving the need for more courage right now in our workplace? What are some appropriate displays we'd like to see more people demonstrate more often that actually involve courage? Like, what are some displays of courage we'd like to see more people demonstrate more often? Ask people what do they think the responsibilities that leaders have to put more courage inside of people or to drive out fear. Start in a general way before you start in a specific way, because you don't want people to feel indicted or you telling the company that it's broken and needs to be fixed. Just start by creating curiosity around the conversations around courage, because they will come to their own conclusion of why courage matters and the importance of it. We do have some guidance and advice on this in the Courageous Leadership Training Guide. We have a whole module. It's the only officer self-training program I've ever seen that has a module dedicated to the executive briefing. How do you start the conversation with senior executives to get them to be even aware that courage is needed around here, and provides guidance for that.
Great, and we've got time here for one more question,
Great.
and this one's from Brad, and it's actually the other direction. But how can we show trust or vulnerability, but not go too far?
Yeah, good question, right? Because you don't want to be like, do you like me? Am I a good leader for you? Because you really look like a wimp. And we want strong leaders, but we don't want weak leaders, right? We want authenticity. We want vulnerability. We do. We want that. We want humility in a leader, but we don't want a weakling. So I get the question. It's a good question, Brad. So here's what I would say. Do simple things that show and demonstrate humility. Ask questions. Don't always prescribe answers to people. Even if you have the answer, ask questions because it forces people to be self-reliant, to think for themselves. Listen, somebody put that earlier. You've got to be a good listener. Give people a voice. Show them that you care what their opinion is, even if they're 3 levels underneath you. It shows that you take people seriously. Have a check. Deputize somebody to be a check on your own leadership. Walk the deck plates. This comes from John Havlick, my Navy SEAL buddy. Don't be up there in the rarefied air where the offices and the senior offices are and cloister yourself only among the senior execs and only be hanging out with them. Walk the shop floor. Get out there on the deck plates, they call it in the Navy, where you're interacting with people at lower levels of you and taking them seriously. So there's plenty of things you can do to demonstrate humility without demonstrating weakness. Great.
Brad replied. He said, "Thank you."
Of course.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bill. And for those of you on the line today that are new to HRDQ, I just want to share a little bit about us. We publish research-based experiential learning programs that you can then deliver in your organization. So check out our online or print self-assessments, our workshops like Bill's Courageous Leadership. We have up out of our seat games, and then reproducible workshops you can also customize. So check out our website or give our call to our customer service team. And if you need help either learning a training program or you want one of our expert trainers like Bill to come out and deliver it for you, we also provide those services. So we look forward to being your soft skills training resource. And we hope you enjoyed today's webinar. And Bill, again, always a pleasure working with you.
Likewise, Sarah. And thanks everybody for showing up. Take care. Be courageous.